The Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs brings together individuals who are changing the face of urban America. Today, we meet Dr. Beth Nagy, Assistant Lecturer of Planning Practice at the Levin College. So welcome, Dr. Nagy, to the Levin Podcast. Welcome, everyone, to the Levin Podcast. Today, we're going to kind of talk to you about your unique background and how you are with the Levin College. So first, I'm going to introduce myself. Hello, I'm Kristen Blazek. I'm the Coordinator of Student Recruitment for the College of Urban Affairs.
Molly Schnoke, the Project Manager for the Center for Community Planning and Development at the Levin College of Urban Affairs.
Beth Nagy, Assistant Lecturer of Planning Practice at the Levin College of Urban Affairs.
Right. The one thing I want to point out real quick is that you do have your doctorate.
I do.
And that's something that I really want to talk about real quick.
Okay.
What type of doctorate do you have? Because I know it's different than what a lot of faculty have.
Sure. I have a Doctor of Education degree, an EDD, in Urban Educational Leadership. Yeah. Particularly how to design curriculum associated with urban planning and urban affairs.
All right. Awesome. So where are you from?
I'm originally from Cleveland. Grew up on the east side mostly. Started downtown, went to preschool at Tri-C. Lived in the Slavic Village, Shaker, Mayfield, South Euclid. Graduated from Brush High School. Moved to Cincinnati for a while and found my way back here 3 years ago.
All right. Real quick, do you have any hobbies?
I'm a mom. That's a big hobby.
That's a job and a hobby.
Yes. Community service would probably be a hobby. I'm a litter picker in the neighborhood and do some of the neighborhoody kinds of things like kids events and do some board service here and there and anything that I can lend my assets to where they might need help.
All right. And so you went to Tri-C for preschool.
I did.
So you graduated with an associate's degree after preschool.
Yes, I started early.
You started early. And you went to Brush and stuff. And then I know you went to DAP. So did you get your EDD from UC or?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
All of my education was at University of Cincinnati. Mm-hmm. I took an elective class in high school in interior design, and I really enjoyed that. So I thought that maybe architecture might be the direction for me. And I was interested in staying near to home, kind of a one-tank trip kind of college away from home. And the University of Cincinnati was one of the architecture programs that was well-known and respected in the state. So I enrolled in the architecture program. And during my first year in that program, I realized that I was interested in more than just one structure designs, that I was interested in the whole city. And I wanted to widen my perspective. So I was walking down the college hallway, the College of Design, Art, Architecture, and Planning, and noticed a hallway that had a bunch of urban planning stuff on the wall, and I had no idea what that was. But I looked, and I was like, well, there's more than one building there. There's a whole slew of buildings, and there was a faculty member with a door open. As I was looking at the materials on the wall, and he turned out to be an advisor. And he said, "You see something that interests you?" And I said, "Yes, but I don't know anything about it." And so he said, "Welcome to the College of DAP planning program. Come on in and let's talk about it." And probably about 45 minutes to an hour later, I was changing my major.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. So how did you end up in higher ed, though?
Good question. So I completed my undergraduate degree in urban planning. It was really more a urban design oriented program, very artistic in nature. And I pursued my graduate degree with a public administration focus. And in the meantime, while I was a graduate student, one of the faculty members in my program asked if I would be interested in teaching one of the classes. They were looking for a faculty member. The class was a TBA at the time. And I said, I have no experience with teaching. And he said, but you have experience with this class. And I did. I had taken it as a student. And he said, so you'd be perfect. And it was known as the field trip class, where you took students to learn about the different kinds of sectors and positions that you could have as a planner. And I taught that class, and I really enjoyed it, and the students enjoyed it, and I said, I think I could do this again. And I did it again and again and again. And then while I was working as a professional, not to say that academics aren't professional, but in the professional field, I said, what do I need to do in order to do the teaching thing full time? And they said, well, you have to earn a doctoral degree. And I said, in what? And they said, in anything, particularly the degree that you're interested in teaching. And I said, but I already know all the stuff that I would want to teach. I just don't know how to teach. And they said, well, why don't you look into education? I said, that's a pretty good idea. And so I found my way over to the Urban Educational Leadership Program in the College of Education. I also believe it had human services and criminal justice in that college. And I was very interested in community engaged curriculum, how to present community planning or planning topics, or really urban studies topics, to lots of different audiences, traditional college student age, maybe secondary school, like upper high school level, and adult learners. So I learned a little pedagogy, and learned a little andragogy. And then I was like, well, I think I need to go find a teaching job now. Didn't go as quickly as I would hope to find that position, but I was gainfully employed in the public sector at that time, and the position came available at the Levin College, and I said, I am perfect for that position, and I applied, and here I am, and I'm so happy.
But before that, you spent a lot of years in practice and planning.
Correct.
And so can you tell us a little bit about the kinds of things that you did, right, down in Cincinnati, and, sort of the difference between how you find Cleveland and Cincinnati in that world?
Well, I'll start with the professional side of things and how I'm making that connection to the classes. But so I had a very non-traditional planning path, which I think kind of informed where I am today, and that most planning graduates will find a planning firm where they do design work and contract work and responding to RFPs, or they go into the public sector working for government, traditional county planning agency or city planning agency, maybe even some local neighborhood planning, like at a CDC local neighborhood level. I found myself at a school district, and that was a really strange position. It was, I worked in the facilities division at first, and my job was based on a technical skill I had at the time, which is GIS, which stands for Geographic Information Systems. And it was a fairly new technology at the time. I'm not going to say how long ago, so that nobody knows how old I am. But I found my way into that position because the school district was embarking upon a rebuilding plan, just like Cleveland schools had a rebuilding plan. So Cincinnati Public Schools wanted somebody to be able to help map all the things that they were doing, help with site planning for the actual school sites themselves, recreational opportunities with other agencies and nonprofits in the community, enrollment planning. They weren't too familiar with census data, so I helped them with that and kind of gave them a little bit more of a full picture of what their district looked like, who was attending, if they weren't attending, where were they going, showing where all the schools in the district were. And that's really where I learned Cincinnati really well, spending my time mapping and then going out into the field and verifying data, and then showing them the power of GIS to be able to attach more information to students and schools and transportation routes and things like that. And so I stayed there for 8 years. Until the rebuilding plan kind of was on its tail end, and there wasn't a whole lot of mapping still needed. And a position came available at the Community Building Institute, which is an arm or a division of Xavier University, just a couple miles away from University of Cincinnati. And they were looking for a project manager for a multi-million-dollar community development grant. And I said, even though I've been at the school district for 7 years, 8 years, I'm vested, and most people don't want to leave at that point, but I was still fairly young, and I wanted to expand my horizons, and so I took a pay cut, and I went to the Community Building Institute. and worked on, was the project manager for a grant called Place Matters. And United Way and Xavier University developed a partnership, and that's what funds this Community Building Institute. And so they act as a community development and planning arm for Xavier and also for United Way by contract when things come up. Little known is that you don't really think of United Way as a community development agency, but a lot of the work that they do supports community development. And so that was a place-based investing project. And what that means is they wanted to concentrate resources, financial and otherwise, into smaller geographies than countywide or region-wide. And so they thought if they invested all of their resources in a smaller geography, they would see results faster. And not only that, but instead of focusing on one program, they wanted to bring about 10 programs together in that place. So the 3 communities that I worked in on behalf of or act as a liaison and lots of different things, but I worked with the Price Hill community on the west side, the Avondale community on the east side, and the city of Covington south of the river. And what we did was, the goal was to marry up social and human services, workforce development, housing, education, health, and planning kind of all together, and to make sure all of those folks were having the same conversation and that they were leveraging their resources for a bigger, more impactful result. And so I worked with lots of community development corporations and other nonprofits, the city, and then a completely different state in Covington, so adapting to some of the different policies and rules across the river. And after 5 years, the pilot program was a 6-year program, and at the 5th year, it looked like it was going to continue, but in a different direction. And so, excuse me, it looked like a good time for me to hand that work off to the next staff person. And I found myself as a assistant director of an academic center at Xavier University as I forget the title. Assistant director of the Eigel Center for Community Engaged Learning. And my position was focused on students and teaching faculty community engaged methods. So how to take their just in the classroom classes and develop more partnerships in the community, often known as service learning, sometimes called community engaged learning. But I managed a faculty development academy for a year with 8 to 10 faculty members and 8 to 10 community partners, and kind of put them together. And then I worked with faculty on how to modify their syllabus to be able to incorporate those things, and the community partners with, how to work with an academic, a traditional academic, and it was a great experience. And the other portion of my position was dedicated to a scholarship program, which was, it was once known as the Service Fellows, and it had been renamed or refashioned into something called the Community Engaged Scholars. And they were a select group of students that had a really strong community service background and were leaning towards positions or careers in which they could be more impactful in a community-based setting, in a nonprofit or public sector, or even entrepreneurial type position. It wasn't limited to any particular major. And I would help put together their gatherings where we'd bring in some fairly high-level speakers. I would take those students out on excursions to different neighborhoods and different organizations to show them, hey, here's an opportunity, or were you familiar with this? And those organizations would give, here's what we do, and they'd take us on a tour. And students really enjoyed that, and it gave them a better feel for, that might be something I want to do. And so I worked in that position for about a year until they were at full capacity. They had an interim director at the time because the director actually came here to CSU, Dr. Byron White.
So in the various roles that you had down in Cincinnati and getting to know the Cincinnati community, when you came up here, how did you find Cleveland, the difference between Cincinnati and from when you had left and then come back?
Well, it was a big difference. I had visited in the meantime, but hadn't really tooled around and toured and saw the new sites or things. I would go to a baseball game every now and then, went to a couple football games, but didn't really hang around to take stock, mostly because I knew I was just visiting and I was going back. But when I returned, I took a lot. The first month while I was helping the family get settled, in the few moments that I had to myself, I would get in the car and I'd just drive around. And I would look to see if the routes that I still took to the west side to go see my family were still around, and they weren't. I found myself turning around a lot, and while the street was there last time and it's not there this time, which was, it was fine. It was just different, and but gosh, so much construction and new housing, and it's Cleveland's beautiful. Cleveland's just beautiful, and I know everybody all cities had a rough time during the recession, and Cincinnati was no different. It was a really hard time, and Cincinnati is a little bit smaller in terms of its population, the city proper, and so I would expect that Cleveland had a harder time than Cincinnati did for starting the redevelopment process. But what I was able to, a lot of my knowledge about public sector, private sector, the different kinds of organizations, the different sectors, different specialties, I just had to learn that all over again here in Cleveland. So a 22-year network that I developed in Cincinnati, I had to try to build a new network here in Cleveland. And that first year was tough just because of a 4-4 class load, which means I teach 4 classes per semester, and I have anywhere from 150 to 200 students in fall and spring, which didn't give me a whole lot of time to reach out and meet with people, and mostly because I didn't know who to meet with. And now that I'm in my 3rd year, I've showed up to things that were interesting to me. I've suggested to students to go check out things, and I'll take them because I want to go too, and have met a lot of nice people, and a lot of my colleagues in the college and around the university have been helpful, like, oh, you should meet so-and-so. I'd be like, that'd be great. And I was just having a meeting with somebody this morning, of somebody that I've wanted to talk to for a while. I just haven't had the opportunity to, and had a good talk this morning to learn more about the SAIS Education, Higher Education Compact. Right. That's just something I'm interested in, and I think it's great that Cleveland has made that commitment.
Well, how do you find the networks in Cleveland? So, in this idea of placemaking, right, in community development, but how do you grow, expand, and make a place thrive? The types of organizations, not necessarily the individual people, but the types of organizations that are involved in that. Is there a difference between Cleveland and Cincinnati?
I find that the type of community development, community planning, philanthropies are very similar in their structure, and have a lot of the similar styles of working. I imagine in Cleveland it's a little bit similar to Cincinnati or other cities where they still ask you, did you go to high school here? Where'd you go?
Right from here.
Yes.
East side, west side?
In Cincinnati,
river divided?
I always felt a little
city?
bit like an outsider because they said, where are you from? You sound different. I say, we don't sound different in Cleveland, but we actually do. And so I never was really kind of fully embraced as, born and raised in Cincinnati and had access to all those things, but everybody was still very easy to work with, and I was part of a lot of great teams, and when I came to Cleveland, I hope to employ that same philosophy and learn more about one of the things that I really didn't realize was the neighborhoods of Cleveland. And so as I learned like the neighborhoods of Cincinnati, it's like, I wonder what that looks like in Cleveland, because that wasn't a concept to me when I was still here in high school. Mm-hmm. I knew that, my grandma lived on 44th Street, West 44th, but I didn't know that had a neighborhood name. We always just said, we're going out to the west side. So as I have learned more about the neighborhoods of Cleveland, that's been really cool. And I've had the opportunity to work with East Cleveland last semester. I know that's not a neighborhood, but pretty close to Cleveland, but also the Clark Fulton community, which I spent some course projects and just some time in the neighborhood getting to know, what does the CDC do, and what does the Hispanic Business Center do, and what is the reach of community development. And I know that gentrification is something that's a high concern in Cleveland, and so I've talked to a lot of the CDCs about how do you work in those spaces and try to create opportunities or partnerships to keep products and housing and resources affordable in the communities. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge for them because everybody will say we can't control the market. But I think they're coming up with lots of innovative ways to work with the market. And I think that's pretty cool. And they're all doing it a little bit of a different way. And I don't know all of them because I haven't spent time in all the communities. But that's probably one of the biggest learnings for me so far are the communities and the specific neighborhoods within the city that I didn't know before. So it's almost like even though I grew up here, I'm learning it all over again as an adult, and I'm still learning. And like I said, it took me 20 years to build a network like that in Cincinnati, so I've got a lot of catching up to do here in Cleveland.
So teaching the students and being involved in higher education, what is one thing that you would like to stress to students about urban planning, or what should they know going into urban planning?
Mm-hmm.
Like if they're interested in, you were interested in architecture and then you found urban planning.
Mm-hmm.
So what to talk to students about urban planning, and what should they know about it?
One of the things that is a very generic definition for urban planning, and it's land management and administration. That does not sound sexy, that does not sound exciting, but when you start talking about things like, hey, would you like a sexually oriented business to be located next to your house? And I'm like, oh, what? And I said, you can control something like that, or at least you can play a role in whether the land that's next to you is used for such a thing. Ask questions like, is it a good idea for a liquor store to be next to a school? Those are the kind of things that people are like, oh, wait a minute, that's not a good thing. How do I get involved in that process, or who do I talk to? And I think one of the things that I didn't realize as a young person or as a graduate in planning was that I could be involved in those communities and not just a staff person in an office that works on maps and blueprints, but I could actually go out and look around and talk to neighbors and talk to businesses and be like, well, what's going on here? And take a different approach than just being a technician. But one of the skills that has, it's a skill, that has followed me in all my positions, or has been of value in all my positions, is mapping. So whereas geography isn't just geography, it's all the tools that you can use in geography. So how important are maps to us? And mapping is a big deal. And it is a skill that is sought after. And I would argue that if you are not using a map or mapping in some way, that you're not really planning. Because if you can't see the neighborhood and you can't see those dimensions and the connections and the space and all of that, then you're not really planning at all, because you don't know what you're working with.
Right, and the patchwork of land use even within a smaller space. But when you talk about mapping a place, right, and the difference between Cincinnati and Cleveland and I throw in Columbus, right, is you were talking earlier about population and size, right, and so the scale of cities and the scale of which you operate on, and trying to get the students to understand how do you plan for what is really a large dynamic place, right? and how complex that is. What do they think about a place like Cleveland and the kinds of stuff that you guys talk about, like a liquor store in a neighborhood, or understanding the different neighborhoods of Cleveland?
Well, then it leads us into a discussion that's not necessarily quoted as being a planning discussion. It becomes now an urban studies or urban affairs discussion, and I think that's probably what I enjoy most. Is, well, planning is just one part of this whole thing, right? And then they start to think about, well, what else is connected to a city? And it's like infrastructure. Oh yes, infrastructure, that's really important. What kind of infrastructure? Are your sidewalks easy to walk on? do you see flooding on the streets?
What does a place look like?
Yes, not just aesthetics, and sometimes what you see is not really what it is. That there's a lot more going on in that community than what you see on the surface. It's the attractive and the kind of twinkle in the eye when you walk through a new community with new housing and new shops and stuff like that. But even if you're walking through a historic community that may not have that same glimmer on the outside, it has that glimmer on the inside usually, but you have to dig deeper.
It's still a rich, dynamic place.
Absolutely. And probably has a lot more character that's hidden. And then they start to think about, well, I didn't realize that, or oh, maybe this community service work that I was doing at the church, maybe that's more than I thought it was. And oh, now I know why my grandma went to the community council meetings or the city council meetings to talk about safety in her neighborhood or something like that. So a lot more social issues start to arise. And whereas planners can't control social issues, urban affairs professionals can work more deliberately in that way with people and policies. And planning is just one part of that. And so I think it's the value of seeing the connection of that major with other things. And whereas, of course, because I have a degree in planning, I'd love to see everybody be a planner. But again, that's just one spoke in the wheel. And if you want to be a planner, that's one thing. If you want to be a nonprofit administration professional, that's another thing. But that's all part of this whole urban world. And also students that are coming from rural communities and suburban communities, that just because we say urban doesn't mean that it's not connected to a suburban community or a rural community, because we have this regional relationship. Right. And that's been, I haven't had as many students that are from rural communities, but just recently, talking with a few students when we were working with a Clark Fulton project, asking them, what'd you think of that dynamic? Have you been in Clark Fulton before? How did that feel different or look different? And it was an experience for them. They're like, I've never been in that kind of place before. I hadn't been somewhere so dense, or going through complete renovation of a whole block. That just doesn't happen in my rural community. But saying, we do have a connection to the urban community, all those farm to table relationships, or just because we have a lot of space doesn't mean that we don't want to do something with it. So I think lots of different connections and lots of different things going on.
All right. So what do you see the next steps for students? I'm gonna say that sentence over again.
Okay.
That question is happening again, because where do you see our students going? Like, what do you want our students to take from our college to go out there and maybe work in Cleveland to do?
Or any community.
Or
right?
any community,
Suburban,
right?
Rural community.
Right.
I hate to say what I would like to see them. I
We're
ask them
asking you.
I usually talk to students a lot about what they feel most comfortable with. Do you like marketing? Do you like direct client or direct neighborly interaction? Do you care about health and wellness, or do you care about housing? And so I try to find something that they're really interested in already, and that they thought might just be a hobby, or I just do this sometimes, but I really like it. I'm like, okay, so that could be a career. And then they're, oh, I didn't realize that, or you already have some experience with running a community service event, or a forum talking about education in your neighborhood, or you've been to city council meetings and they know you by your name now because you've been to so many. That shouldn't be a hobby. That can be more than that. And students start to think about that differently. And so I think that they realize they can play a role in their community that they didn't think of before, and that they could make a difference. And I think that's an important learning, like, oh, that's not just this little thing that I do on the side sometimes. That could be my career.
Well, Dr. Nagy, this has been super amazing. I have one super important question to ask you. Are you ready? It's really important.
I know.
So let's say you find yourself at a karaoke night. Happen to on purpose. And you go up to sing a song. Which karaoke song would you sing?
I don't know which song in particular, but it would probably be some early Soundgarden or some early Beastie Boys.
Okay.
But there's so many to pick from.
So many to pick
Yes.
from.
Maybe that's what we'll do next time on the next podcast.
The next podcast, we'll have you sing one of those.
Fabulous. Fabulous.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Nagy. This has been absolutely amazing. Oh, yes, thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thanks for having. And if you guys like what you hear, make sure that you like and subscribe to the Levin page, the YouTube page, also this podcast series. We are, any forums coming up right now? Nothing for the summer, but in the fall, it's going to be great.
In the fall. We've got lots going on in the fall.
So make sure that you sign up for the forum email blast so that you can be up to date with all the events that are happening both at Levin and with the forum. And other than that, thank you again. And this will conclude this episode of the Levin Podcast.